anyone else do something like that. And also his track on that, I think it's the last one on that album, I highly recommend, is called Delta City Blues. And I was so obsessed with that tune. I bought the transcription book and was trying to figure it out with the notes and playing it by ear. And at one point in time, I could make my way through most of that. But the way that he plays the opening of that and the tune itself is all overtones. I mean, he's playing these low fundamental fingerings and the melody. I mean, all of that is overblown harmonics, overblown overtones. And so immediately I was trying to figure out how to make this happen. I couldn't quite figure it out. I knew that there was something out there. There was much more to the saxophone than I knew about in my world at that point in time when I was 14 years old or something like this, listening to that album. So the reason that I bring that up is because I feel like in a lot of ways that has informed a lot of the decisions that I've made and a lot of the avenues of interest that I have just followed my whole career. Is like, how can I make that sound? What sound is that? You know, I'm really attracted to these kinds of things and trying to figure out ways that I can use or play the saxophone that are interesting to me. Of course, I love to play the classical repertory. There's no question about that. But I also have this other side that's a little bit evil, that makes me want to look for those things. And so I think, like Dr. Laboda said, I think maybe I'm a little bit known for doing those kind of wacky things and playing that kind of music. And in fact, I was just there. Some of you, I remember, I was just there. When was that, Emily? In January or February? It's right before COVID.
It was like the day after my birthday, so January 31st or something.
Right. So yeah, so it was this last spring before everything was kind of shut down, and we played a program together. Maybe some of you heard, we played this really fantastic about half-hour long trio by Joey Crane that, if you were there, you remember had a lot of vocalizations and, you know, air sounds and kind of unusual things that we were doing that you know, maybe don't expect from a traditional saxophone concert. So the way that I got involved doing that was when I was a student at the University of North Texas. At the time, I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are now, but at the time they had over 2,000 music majors in the program. I'm pretty sure it was the largest in the country at that time. Maybe it still is, I don't know. But the saxophone studio, classical and jazz combined, was more than 100 students. And so that was a lot of people, right? And the way that structure there worked is that there's two professors, a classical and a jazz professor, and then the doctoral and master students have an assistantship. And so there was maybe 8 TAs, something like this, and underneath each one of them, the undergraduates would kind of take lessons through that. So each one of those students maybe had between 8 and a dozen undergraduate students in a quartet or something like this. So it was this kind of pyramid structure. And the first couple years I was with a TA, and my junior year when I became by the way, I did 5 years. I did a victory lap, but my third out of the 5 years, I became a saxophone performance major, and I was studying with the professor. So there was, which was Eric Nestler's, a really wonderful teacher for me at that time. There was maybe, 5 or 6 doctoral students and maybe 7 or 8 master students. And then I think there was 2 or 3 undergrads studying with him. And so the composition studio was also equally as large. There was maybe over 100 composition students. And at the undergraduate level, they had to play a jury like all of you do, like everybody does. And their jury consisted of composing a piece of music, finding another student to learn it, and come in and perform it during their jury time. And I think, I don't even remember now. It's been so long, but I think that maybe somebody didn't plan ahead and emailed my professor and said like, oh, I've got this jury next week. I need a saxophonist. And in hindsight, my professor was probably like, I don't want to bother any of the grad students. So like, you will now do it. But I was, basically chosen to do that. It was just a little obligation I had. But I really enjoyed it. I loved the process of being in the room with the composer and being able to negotiate in real time the ideal interpretation. I mean, oftentimes we go to lessons And especially if it's older music, transcription, the composer's long dead. I mean, we can talk about how we think the music should go, but we can't ask them, and we don't have any direct connection to them. But this, the composer was sitting right there, and the music had never been played before, so there wasn't a best practice for it. And in fact, the music may be so hot off the press, like the ink is still wet. So we can kind of negotiate some of those things. So having the opportunity to be like, oh, I think I hear what you're trying to do there. Let me do this. Or I can't do that sound, but maybe I can make this sound. Or you know what would be better if instead of writing it this way, it would be clearer if you wrote it like that, if somebody else were to come along after me and play it. And I enjoyed that process. And so to be honest with you, I don't remember who that composer was. I don't remember the piece. It wasn't very good, but that really wasn't the point for me. The point was that process. Like I really enjoyed that, and I wanted to do it again. And so the following semester, I just told some of the composition students like, hey, I'll do it. I liked that. And I think maybe word got out like, oh my God, someone will do it. We don't have to beg them. And so the next semester I had maybe 3 pieces that I was playing a jury for. And the semester after that, it was another 3 or 4. And it really just kind of snowballed in this way. I got to cut my teeth a little bit on that. And I joined the new music ensemble at North Texas, which is called Nova. And I had a wonderful opportunity there. At the time, it was pretty novel to me because we were playing music that didn't have notes on lines. I mean, there wasn't a key signature. Some of them didn't even have scores. They were verbal notation or text scores or graphic scores, or it was just free improvisation. In fact, I happened to be at the right place at the right time because one of the semesters I was in there, it had been organized for Pauline Oliveros to come to North Texas and have a residency. Do any of you know that name, Pauline Oliveros? No? Pauline Oliveros just passed away a few years ago. I'm not exactly sure how old she was. She was in her 80s. But she was a wonderful composer and sound artist and improviser and philosopher in the 20th century, a contemporary of John Cage in this sort of mid-late 20th century artistic movement. And she developed this concept known as deep listening, which is kind of a meditative process, the act of observing oneself listening, not just listening to hear, but listening to understand and analyze and to feel that in your soul and in a vibration in the universe, like this connection to everything that when you are playing music, that it really comes from this place. And a lot of times her music doesn't have notes on lines, it's a text score. It's a suggestion of something to a sense of how the music should go, and it's up to you to listen and to play whatever is in your soul and whatever, I don't like that word, but vibes with everybody else that's playing. So she came to North Texas and I got to work with her and play some of her music. And at the time, I'm ashamed to admit I didn't know who she was. I'd never heard of her. It was just a thing that we did. And it was like, I was busy with school. I was an undergrad. I was, 20 and snotty. We just move on to the next thing. But in hindsight, that's really one of the more formative experiences that I've had because it's opened up my world and how I think about music and how I think about improvising. I mean, at the time, I was a jazz player. I came to improvisation through thinking that I needed to play certain licks over certain chords and really play within the confines of the style I'm trying to make and all of this. And that's very appropriate when you're playing jazz, but there is a world of improvisation that is beyond that. And that was really formative for me. And then I decided to move to Minneapolis. And before I had moved there, I had the idea, or maybe somebody had told me that the new music scene, the contemporary music scene in Minneapolis wasn't great, which is wrong. It's excellent, actually. It's a really wonderful scene. But I had that thinking going into it. So I thought, I better line something up. So in addition to trying to find a job, which I did, teaching clarinet and saxophone lessons to 5th graders, I also had an audition lined up with a professional contemporary music ensemble. I mean, it didn't pay very much, but it was a gig. Most of the people that in it weren't students, and it opened up my world in a way because it introduced me to a world outside of school. You know, I was working outside of the academy in the scene, in the local scene with people who I wasn't going to school with, people who were in fact much older than me, and people who had the same interests that I did in music. And so from there, it really snowballed. I'd show up to a gig and play with some people, and people would come up and talk to me afterwards, and I'd get to know them, and then I'd hear, oh, well, maybe they have a gig. So then I'd go and hear them play. And just slowly over time, you get to know your way within a scene, and you start to network with these people, and it just kind of grows from there. People say, hey, maybe I could write you something, or maybe we could work together and collaborate on something. So anyway, that is kind of a little rant about a Google Earth view of kind of my path up to that point. I mean, I graduated school and got a job and moved out here to the East Coast, of course. But do any of you have any questions or thoughts about that? Or I'm curious to know if any of you are pursuing a similar kind of work, or you want to move to a city like that. I mean, what's on your mind?
Okay, I'll go. So I guess one question I would have would be, like, what do you say to the people who are like, oh, well, I could do that or whatever, like, especially with contemporary music or new music, it doesn't seem like hard. So then people aren't like impressed, I guess, is the right way maybe to think about it. So how would you describe to just like the common person, not a musician, the reasoning behind like playing new music?
Well, there's a couple things in there. Well, I'm not sure that I agree with the assessment that it's not difficult. I think that it is extremely difficult, but it may be difficult in a different way than you're used to. It's a different kind of virtuosity. I mean, I think probably all of us have the idea in our head that virtuosity means I can move my fingers really fast. I can play scales at 160 and 16th notes, and I can play in the altissimo, and like that is hard. There's no question of that. But a different kind of virtuosity, I mean, think about well, a great example is the work that Dr. Laboda played back in January by Marc-Andre, IV-12. That is an incredibly difficult work. And the dynamic range, for example, on that piece at the lowest end is P, 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 P. And at the other end of the extreme dynamic range, it's PP. Right? So I think maybe almost at no point in time in that work do you really make a true tone on the saxophone, but instead it explores all of the colors in the like sub volume of the instrument. You've got micro slaps. You've got multiple different kinds of slap tongues. You've got these slapped tubes. You've got air sounds. You have quarter tones. There are fluttering things. There's lots of multiphonics. So, I mean, I think it's incredibly difficult to play all of that work, or to do all of those techniques within the work, but it's maybe difficult in a different way than we are accustomed to thinking about it. It's a different kind of virtuosity than if you were to play the Demersimon, right? Or the Pequeña Chartis. In terms of the other part of your question, like what would I say to people who are not into it? I think it's fine. You don't have to be into it. I'm into it. Right? That's why I'm standing on stage and playing it for you. That's my business. And if you don't like it, that's cool, man. Somebody came up to me after a concert one time. I'd played a piece by Alvin Lucier with my wonderful friend Brittany Primavera. We have a duo together called Avid Duo, which is flute and saxophone. We've been playing together for about 10 years now, and we played this wonderful work by Alvin Lucier, flute, saxophone, piano, and sine waves. Sine oscillators, I think is what it's called. And so it's got this pitch, and slowly one sine tone rises and the other one lowers. And it does this thing over the course of 16 minutes, and all you play is a whole note or the length of a breath. But you have to hold that note exactly level, because as these sine tones sweep over the note, the intonation goes from being exactly in tune to slowly start beating as it gets out of tune. And then the beating gets faster and faster the further away it gets from being in tune, until it's the next semitone apart, and then it levels out to being in tune again. So you have to hold that note exactly perfect. So again, it's a different kind of virtuosity, but the piece is really wonderful for me because it just transports me to another place. It's about 15 minutes long. Every time I finish performing that work or listening to it, I feel like 30 seconds have gone by. It really just has this ability to kind of sweep me away with it. And one time I had played it, just at a concert, and this woman came up to me afterwards and said, "I hated that piece. Don't ever play it again." And my reaction was like, "I love that. That's amazing." And she was like, "No, you don't understand. I hated it." I'm like, "No, I got what you're saying. I just think it's awesome that you told me that." Like you had feelings about that piece. You were affected by that, and so much that you came and told me about it. So, I'm of the philosophy that love and hate are very closely related. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love and hate is indifference. How many pieces have you ever heard in your life you went, meh, and then forgot about it forever? Many. We do that a lot. That's kind of the baseline. And the things that pique our interest, that we keep thinking about, those are the things we start to associate. Oh, I really like that, right? But for me, what has been really interesting is that the things that I hate, sometimes I come around on the other side of that. I mean, a few years ago, maybe I shouldn't say in a public forum like this, but I heard this work that I really hated. Gosh, I hated that piece. And it bothered me. It bothered me for... in fact, I'll tell you, this was at Darmstadt. So this is, maybe one of the premier summer courses for contemporary music and experimental music in the world. And I heard this work that really bothered me, but I kept thinking about it over and over. I mean, I would be like doing other things, and that thought would come back into my mind about that piece. And I'd be like, ugh, that piece. And after about 3 months, my attitude had changed about it. After thinking it, I thought, it's actually brilliant. That's the smartest work I've ever seen in a long time. And I programmed that work, actually. I mean, I didn't play it. It was for my students. I had my students play that work, and we talked about it. And that same semester, somebody who was a guest artist came to our school and played that same piece on their program. So, I mean, it was funny to see, like, here's somebody that we don't know that's just a guest artist from another studio playing that same piece. But to have this conversation about it. And so, when things really stick in my memory like that, I'm really intrigued by it, and I want to find out why I have that reaction. Why do I feel that way? And sometimes my thinking about it changes, and sometimes it doesn't. But either way, I think it's okay. I think, I mean, here's the reality is that how long does it take you to learn a piece of music from sight reading to performance? Maybe right now a semester? Maybe half a semester, 6 weeks. What's the shortest amount of time you feel like I could give you a piece of music, you can sight read it and get it ready to perform in public? That's how long you have to live with that work. It could be 100 hours. You're going to learn the Glazunov Concerto right now. This semester, you might spend 100 hours working on that piece. It's going to take the audience 11 minutes to hear it. Right? So you really have to find something that you love, that you want to explore, that you want to investigate, something that can keep your attention for 100 hours. And if somebody listens to it for 11 minutes and doesn't like it, that's okay, because you spent all of the time, the other time with it. If they listen to it for 100 hours and still don't like it, okay, that's fine. But, I don't like death metal. I wouldn't go to that show. That's fine. But there's millions of people that love that music and go to it. So, that's their business. Any other questions?
Questions, people.
I have a question. So I was just wondering, what do you think the best way to advertise yourself as a musician is, like, in today's world? Is it through a university, or through people or how would you go about doing that?
To advertise yourself for what purpose? For a concert?
Yeah, just playing more gigs and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for concerts and joining groups.
Sure. Well, my teacher Eugene Rousseau used to talk about this a lot. Actually, he would say, it's one thing to be good at your instrument, to have the technique, to be able to play in tune. There's a whole other level of visibility on top of that, right? You want people to see you doing that kind of thing. That's how you make a career, for playing for people, and so forth. So there's a lot of ways that you can go about doing it. Through a university is really great, man. If you want to set up a concert somewhere and go there and play, the nice thing about it is there's kind of a built-in audience and kind of a built-in system or mechanism in place for advertising those things, for selling tickets. Usually people are there to print the programs for you. You send off that stuff and it all, kind of happens. And I mean, it's not magic. There are people that work at that university that make sure that those things come together. And usually the students who attend that university would go to the concert. So that's a really great way, of course, and you get to network that way and meet those people. So that's certainly one avenue that you could go down. Another avenue would be to rent a space, and it could be a lot of different places. It could be a bookstore. I've seen concerts in bookstores. I've played concerts in bookstores and record shops, and there's art galleries, art museums. There are venues, bars, restaurants, this kind of thing. I've played on a series in Minneapolis 2 or 3 times. I don't think it's still really running anymore, but it used to be called, I guess it's still called, if it's running, Punk Ass Classical. And the whole premise of that was that it was a secret location at somebody's private house. And so they'd post this thing all over town. We're having a concert. I'm not telling you where it's at. And part of that was the appeal of like, wait, where's that show? This kind of thing. And there were people who were making really awesome art for it. And it was kind of like the day of the concert. They would be like, here's the address, here's where to park. And everybody would kind of scramble there. I mean, one time it happened to be like 2 blocks from where I was living. It was just in my neighborhood in somebody's garage. And, lo and behold, there's 75 people crammed into this 2-car garage at just this random neighborhood in Minneapolis putting on this show. And it really was this like punk house party for new and experimental music, and people will come out for it. So, you could kind of do this sort of thing, whether it's super DIY, like that situation, or you're actually paying a venue to rent the space and hire whatever that means. I mean, sometimes it means that you're making your own program, and maybe you spend $100 to rent the space, but then it's up to you to make sure that people come. So then you invite your friends. Hey, I'm playing this show. It covers $5. Okay, well, maybe it's $10. If your cover is $10 and you get 10 people to come, you've made your money back, right? And anything beyond that would be called the door. You're getting the door, right? You're getting the profits from that. Some venues do a door split, like they take their fee, however much it costs to hire the doorman and the sound guy, and then whatever you make beyond that, it's just a 50-50 split. So, I mean, places are different. I mean, right now, the thing that I might be thinking about is figuring out ways that you could build your audience base, which at the moment is your family and your friends, the people you know. Right? That's your network. And as you go through your school and your career and your life, you get to know more people, and you try to make the circle a little bit bigger and bring those people in. But the thing that you might be thinking about doing now is streaming concerts. I mean, there's a Twitch, for example, is a really great platform doing live stuff like this. I mean, this is generating content. So you could certainly be doing things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything else? Somebody else had their hand up.
Yeah, you had talked about like the sheet music that like didn't have like notes on lines or like time signatures or key signatures, and that's just a wild concept to me. So I guess my question is, doesn't that get like confusing, or like do you like, I don't really know how to word, like does it? Yeah. confusing or something.
Sometimes it can get confusing. Absolutely. What's a good example here? It's like, I mean, it's a little bit like reading a map, right? Have you ever traveled somewhere and got a map? Like your first time to New York. Oh my gosh. I mean, now we all look at maps on our phone, right? I mean, whatever. But the first couple of times I went to Europe, actually, I didn't have I didn't have data. I could only use Wi-Fi, and so I was taking like a million screenshots of Google Maps, kind of all around where I was, in case I found myself without Wi-Fi. I could try to be like, okay, I'm at the corner of this street and this street. Maybe I could find myself on this photo of a map. But it's the same kind of thing. I mean, usually there's a legend. It tells you like this symbol means to do that, and this symbol means to do that. And then it's a matter of figuring it out. I mean, one of the first pieces that I ever played like that, personally, I had commissioned for myself from my friend who was a composer at North Texas. His name was Mark Oliviero. He is an Australian. He lives in Australia now. And he wrote this wonderful Australian-inspired piece for me called Beami from the Sky. And what he did was take a star map of the night sky seen from Australia and superimpose all of these images on top of it that were petroglyphs from the Sydney rock carvings. And each symbol meant that I did something else. And the position of it on an XY axis on the physical piece of paper determined, like, this way was like rhythmic material and this way was pitch material. So if it was up here, it may be high and fast, but down here would be low and slow, and everywhere in there, you know, how where it was positioned would determine those things, and the size of the image itself determined volume. So, you know, the score itself was one sheet, but the instructions it came with was a book of about 25 pages. And I remember really sitting there like, okay, this symbol and this location of this size means I play. And I really had to figure out the piece kind of bit by bit that way. And then a line goes this way, okay? And then I do this, and in a way I developed my own version of that piece. And because the score was a star map, there was maybe 22-3 constellations in it, something like this, but in any given performance you would only play 9 of them. And so every performance could really be different. I could start over here and go this way, or I could start here and circle back, or whatever the case was. So I think over the course of the time I've played that, I think I've maybe only made 3 interpretations. I would do it a couple times and feel really good about it, and then I would put it away. In a year or two I would come back and be like, okay, now I'm gonna do a new version of it. So, I mean, the short answer is that you figure it out as you go. I mean, the thing that I really love about this, about doing this in a lot of ways, I mean, there was one piece in particular that a really good friend of mine, a wonderful composer, Tiffany Skidmore, wrote me a piece for saxophone and piano called The Book of Urizen. And I told her, like, feel free to do anything in that piece. It's fine. Just no G quarter tone sharps. Because her language is very microtonal, and it's very hard to play G quarter tone sharp. I mean, you press the G sharp button, the key goes up. You put anything down on the right hand, the key goes down. So it's not really doable. And she was like, don't worry, I'm not writing any G quarter tone sharps whatsoever. I got the piece that was 19 million G quarter tone sharps in it. And I was like, what happened? And she was like, I'm sorry. And so that was a real challenge. Fortunately, I play a Yamaha saxophone, and I figured out how to literally modify my saxophone in order to play a G quarter tone sharp. Selmer does not have this, and I don't know about the Rempone and Kazani that you're playing on, Emily, but there are on the back side of the horn underneath. Do I have my horn here? Nope, I sure don't. I have my vintage horn here. My other one's in the other room. But on the back side of the horn here, on a modern horn, right, there's like a little bridge covering here, and underneath that is a post that on Yamaha has some adjustment screws. And if you like just back out the bottom one, when you put down the third finger on the right hand, it doesn't close the G sharp key all the way. So if you play G sharp plus the third finger on the right hand, it like half closes that hole and plays a perfect G quarter tone sharp. And so for me, that was a really fun process because I had to, research what can my horn do? How can I modify my horn here? Now I'm learning a brand new note that I haven't played before, and so forth. So that kind of investigation into the music and figuring out how to make these sounds is, been a huge catalyst for me to really keep working in this way. I just love that process. I hope that answers your question about figuring this out. There's not, every piece is quite different. So there's not one, definitive way to go through or interpret that material. And that's also a really attractive thing to me. I can make my version of this piece.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Am I gonna have to call on someone? I told you all to have a question ready.
I guess I'll go. In your experience, when you worked with those composers, you were talking about like that map. It's really, really different. Did you only play their pieces like in school, or did you ever go in public and do pieces? And if you did go in public, like what kind of crowds is that? What kind of place did you play that type of music at?
Well, I think that, so to answer your question, yes, absolutely. I went out in public and played this music. I've played this music on the streets and in bookstores and record shops and venues and all kinds of things. I played this music once at a loft party, and not that piece particularly, but there's this loft party with about 200 people. It was definitely not my crowd. Somehow I ended up on the bill to this thing. There was some avant-garde film that was happening. There was a dance piece. There was some of this, and the kind of vibe was another one of these like, it's not really advertised. It's word of mouth. You pay $10 to get a cup when you walk in the door, and there's a keg over there, and there was about 200 people there, and it was, I think no one virtually knew about the saxophone or this music. It wasn't an academic crowd by any means, and they loved it. So I think oftentimes, especially kids, love contemporary music. The flute and saxophone duo, Avid Duo, that I was telling you about earlier, she and I did this 35 performance tour in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas about 8 or 9 years ago, something like this maybe, where we went and played in middle schools and high schools and did these little presentations. We played some contemporary music. We showed kids how to make multiphonic sounds on the saxophone, how to do a jet whistle on the flute. These kinds of things. And I think the adults that were organizing this tour, I say adults, the business that was organizing this tour, the guy who owned that business was, maybe in his 60s or something like that, was very hesitant about booking us. We were on the same concert tour series as like the Canadian Brass, and I forget who else was on that. Maybe like Breaking Winds, this kind of thing. So the music that they were playing, of course, is of a very different flavor than what we were doing. And I might say that like some of those performances maybe was the best of that series, because the students were like hearing brand new things that they'd never heard, and they loved it. And I think oftentimes, even about my own students at Virginia Tech, sometimes we have these biases that we come in with music and we think like, I already know I hate that, so I don't want to learn anything about it. Well, like, you're coming into college with a high school education at best, right? You don't know what you don't know yet. And I think having an open mind about those kinds of things is a really advantageous place to be approaching your education. Like, just learn everything that you possibly can without so much of a value judgment on it, at least at first. Like, I'm learning this because it is part of the tradition. It is part of the history. It is part of the zeitgeist, frankly. A lot of the music is the music of today. This is what people are making today, right? And we can certainly play the Creston. That's almost 100 years old. That's the music of last century. And it's still good music, and I still love to play it. but I love to play this too, because I think that it's really valuable to have a well-rounded education. I mean, my students at Virginia Tech, we play transcriptions and classical music and jazz and experimental and contemporary music and electroacoustic music, and we improvise. And I think that especially at this point in your education as not a freshman, but as an undergraduate, I mean, take in everything. Maybe you are a freshman. Take in everything that you can during this time. And then if you decide to go to grad school, maybe then you can focus on one thing or the other. But are you an education major?
As of now, yes, but I'm switching it to comp and theory next semester. So I kind of wanted to know about that composition aspect of it.
Sure. I mean, as especially as a composer, I mean, this is the music of today. You want to know definitely what everybody is creating, and maybe it's not your style. I mean, some people only make works in graphic notation, and some people are very experimental. Some people are very traditionalist, and I think that it's all fine. I mean, say what you need to say through the music, but the more that you can study and the more that you know and the more experiences you have, the better human and artist and musician you can be, because you have more experiences.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But especially as an educator as well. I mean, I think, I certainly strive to give my students all of these experiences, everything that they can do to help make them a little bit more well-rounded. I mean, I don't think that it's wise. I think you could certainly do it, but I don't think it's wise today to be going through school and only playing classical saxophone, or only playing jazz saxophone, or even thinking of yourself as, I am a classical saxophonist, or even just a saxophonist. I mean, as a saxophonist, you're already a doubler for one, because we need to play soprano, alto, tenor, baritone. We need to. But it's not a bad idea to learn some clarinet and learn some flute, especially if you want to work on a cruise ship, especially if you want to work in the musical scene or on Broadway or anything like that. If you want to play some of the traditional big band repertory and be able to sit in with them, a lot of Basie charts have flute, right? A lot of the newer stuff has clarinet on it. Some of the charts, Maria Schneider charts, got bass clarinet. I mean, this is the scene today. You want to learn, I think, to wear as many hats as possible, so that when the salsa gig calls and then the wedding gig calls, and then it's like, hey, I want some like wild experimental thing for my party. Can you play this free jazz thing? We're recording for a TV show. Hey, I want to do this. Yeah, I want to do all those gigs. Right? Because I've done a little bit of everything. I mean, in half the time, how many of you have been in band where you're like, I don't like this piece, right? You're feeling about, right? We've all been there. Like, I don't like this piece, right? That didn't matter in that moment, right? We had a job to do. And when you get to make the curatorial decisions, when you're putting on your own show, when you make your Carnegie Hall debut, then you decide what kind of artist you want to be and what kind of music that you want to put out there into the world when you record your albums, and this kind of thing. But I think it's a good idea when you're in school to try to play a little bit of everything, especially if you hate it, to see what you can learn from it and how it might challenge you. Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay, so what are some of the major differences you've noticed from like composing new music in comparison to like older music? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it depends on what we mean by older music, because music from 1,000 years ago is older, but music from 50 years ago is also older.
Okay, maybe not 1,000 years, but like,
right,
like 50.
Right, sure. Well, there's a couple of things that ways that I might answer that. First of all, is that I think a lot of students, in general, especially from maybe high school world, this kind of thing, you tend to be, at least this is my perception. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe some of you have had a different perception, but my perception was when I went to college, I was kind of aware about Beethoven, that exists. I know about like Schumann and Schubert and Mozart. And then my knowledge just kind of dropped off after Stravinsky. I like knew about the Rite of Spring and Debussy and this kind of stuff. But unless they were band composers that I'd played a lot in high school, like Frank Ticheli or John Mackey, this kind of thing, I wasn't like super aware of the music beyond the band world. Just because that was my avenue into it, right, when I was in band. Maybe you were also in choir. But I was not kind of aware of that world. So one thing that I would say is I think that it's a really good idea. This is a plug for your music history and your music theory classes to pay a little attention there to see how this music has evolved. I mean, the Baroque era is distinctly different from classical, which is distinctly different from romantic, which is distinctly different from modern or contemporary, which I would say is distinctly different from the kind of music that's being made in 2020. And so I've been thinking a lot about this recently, like the sort of new praxis, like how would I kind of characterize the music that's being made right now? What is 21st century music like? And it's especially been on my mind a lot because, I mean, for one, we're here. Two, it's like a global pandemic, so we're all online, like right now. And three, I'm having to direct some ensembles. I mean, part of my job at Virginia Tech, and aside from teaching the saxophone studios, I also direct the new music or experimental music ensemble, which we call Enemy, which is all experimental music after 1970. And I direct the Jazz Lab Band. And we were not able to do Jazz Lab Band this semester for a variety of reasons, mostly to do with our facilities and so forth. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you how difficult it is to organize a jazz band online, recording your parts individually. I mean, so much of that process is sitting in a room together, learning how to articulate the same and swing the same way and feel the beat together. And that's really impossible to do separate. So we're kind of having a lecture series at the moment, a guest lecture series for jazz band. But for the new music ensemble, I said, let me see what I can do about creating new music that's for an internet performance. Instead of thinking about it in a square peg, round hole situation where we play music that's for the concert hall and for live audiences, and then we just try to fit it into an online format, what could we create that's designed specifically to be online? And things that are designed specifically to be rehearsed online, so that everything is that way. And so I've commissioned 7 composers to write new pieces for the students. And this semester, I'm part of the cohort with them. So I'm an equal member in that. We're all performing the works together. Some of them are on our instruments. Some of them are off of our instruments. Some of them are video pieces. Well, they're all video pieces, I guess, because it's designed to be streamed online. But what does it mean if it's a video piece right now? Do we have to be standing on a stage and performing, and it's just like you were in the concert hall watching, but on your computer? Or is it really something pretty radically different? I mean, if you look at a lot of music videos that are made even in the pop genre, a lot of them, I mean, if you watch any Lady Gaga video, it's not her just standing on stage singing, right? I mean, it's got costumes and, things are moving in the background and there's all these other actors and it tells this story. There's kind of a narrative there. So how can we start thinking about classical music, contemporary classical music in that way, making something that's specific to that format? And I think that some people are tackling that in a variety of really interesting ways right now. But some people in the bigger institutions of the music world, like, I'm just going to say it, the Met and the New York Philharmonic, are not going that route, and they're just canceling their seasons outright. And all those musicians are kind of screwed and they're out of pay for a year because the structure is not really in place to do something like that. Because to my humble opinion about it is that the audience members tend to be a little bit older and they're maybe not online. I think the audience of your generation, my generation, and the coming generations are going to be online. Like that's, things like symphonies are arts of place. You have to go to the symphony hall. It's the same thing as a library. I don't know what the library is like at East Tennessee right now, but they've been taking the books out of the one at Virginia Tech. I mean, it's like a 6-story building and one floor has books on it. And that's it. So what is the purpose of a library in the 21st century if not to house books, right? We think of that like the library is, it's not an art, but it's like a system, an institution of place. You go to the library. But if the library is filled with books and volumes that are, one, outdated, right? Maybe another book has been published that debunks that last book, right? That's part of it. Everybody's kind of on their phone and on the computers anyway, so people would prefer to have a PDF article than go find that one chapter in that one book. So if you've got a building that's filled with books that are not being touched by human hands, they're not being read, some of them haven't been taken off the shelf in a decade, what's the point of a library, right? And the libraries are asking themselves these questions. This is happening right now. The Library of Virginia Tech, they don't have a lot of books, but they're lending computers and microphones and cameras, and they're changing their spaces around to, be places where you can go and make recordings like that. They've got podcast recording booths and places with green screens, and, they're really trying, I think, making a real effort at trying to adapt to what people need to check out, what needs to be lended at this time. And I think we have to do that as musicians as well. What's the format? Where are the audiences? What kind of music will engage somebody online right now? Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We have time for one more short question if anyone has one. Nobody? That's okay. Okay, everyone say thank you. Do the thing I like you to do. Do it.
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. It's great to chat with you. I hope to see you all again soon to make some music for one another together, this kind of thing. I hope that you are all staying well, staying healthy, staying mentally healthy. I know this is like a really stupid time to be alive. But here we are. So good luck to everyone. Keep practicing.
Thank you. Okay, you all.